Hey, so guess what? Remember when Ben came in and he brought caricatures of you and I?
Yeah, they were
but
awesome.
He didn't have a caricature of himself.
Nope.
I have evened the scales somewhat. I have right here, and I've shown this to you before.
Yes.
This is Ben Olsen's senior photo from high school. We're going to give this.
Put it in the liner notes for those who are just listening via podcast. Just to describe it, he really looks like he's about to bust out his new single as his first entry as his for his solo album after leaving the boy band.
Yeah.
That's what he looks like.
The absolute scariest white boy trumpet solo that's ever been recorded.
Now, he looks an awful lot like a Rick Astley type.
He does, kind of.
Like that he's...
That's the thing, is that even when he was over serious in a senior photo, he still looks cool, because Ben does.
Mm-hmm. That's the big problem, is he actually kind of looks cool.
Yeah.
Unlike us.
Did you get posed everything senior photo taken?
Yeah, it's like it's my Letterman's jacket. Yeah. It looks so high school that it's painful, right?
See,
it doesn't look like that.
I don't have one. It was just like the ones they did on school grounds so they could put something in the yearbook. That's all I've got.
So for seniors at my school, didn't have pictures.
You had to provide your own?
You had to provide a picture for them to put in the yearbook for you. So you could just provide just a regular old picture, but almost everyone went and got senior photos for that reason.
I didn't realize that senior photos was a thing, but it's because I lived in Utah.
I lived in Nebraska. It's not like Nebraska, as we have discussed, was the cutting edge of fashion and or any sort of trend.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
We didn't even get Magic the Gathering until a year after. So we didn't even get the
everyone else
trends until
I suppose we should just be thankful our senior photos were not in sepia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Holding our rifle.
1,000-year stare as we go to fight in the Civil War. Speaking of war, I thought I was the last person in the world to see Oppenheimer. I came in ready to record a podcast about it today, but you have not seen it.
I have not seen it.
Somehow, I am not the last person in the world.
No.
You are.
Here, the thing is, because we intend to do an episode about it, I will watch it.
Yeah.
If that were not the case, I would probably never get around to it. There's nothing about it that compels me and says, Dan, you would love this movie. We should watch it right now.
Do you like other Christopher Nolan movies?
I like some of them.
Okay.
His movies tend to be, and I was saying this earlier to them, very emotionless puzzle boxes where you have to figure out what's going on. And it feels like that gets more so over the course of his career rather than less so. But from everything that they have told me, Adam has convinced me that that's not at all what Oppenheimer is like.
It is not, though. It's very Christopher Nolan, but it's Christopher Nolan. It's interesting. I loved it. I love his films. I'm one of the few people who just absolutely loves Tenet, right? I thought that would be a widespread a lot of people
everyone would love Tenet.
Yeah, everyone loves Inception. I thought they'd love Tenet. Apparently, I am in the minority loving Tenet. So I like it when he super Nolans. But this feels to me a little bit like Nolan wanted to prove a point that I think it's really good that someone did, which is the point of that I often try to make, which is that because someone chooses an artistic style does not mean they are incapable of other ones, right?
Yeah.
And you are right. Nolan tends to make puzzle boxes that are a little bit low on characterization and very high on some intricate narrative
plotting
devices, right? And it's totally okay to not like that, right? To not like the style that someone does is a totally valid criticism. The criticism that I hate is that next step of he does this because he can't do the character.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is like anyone working on that level, any novelist I know working on a professional level, not just talking about myself, I'm talking about any of our friends. They could write in any genre. They could spend the time. They have the skill set to do plot, character, art, like artistic prose, more what I call window pane prose. They have the ability to do all this. They have all the tools. They've practiced them. You don't get to our level without practicing all the tools, and then you choose a style. You could write epic fantasy as great as any epic fantasy writer.
Well, thank you, and I hope that's true because I am starting to write one. So.
Yes. And you have chosen a different style and even when you write epic fantasy, you'll probably use some of the tools that you like best because they're the tools that you enjoy. But complaining that, like, implying that Nolan can't do character is a little like implying that Picasso can't draw eyes straight.
Yeah.
Right? Well, no, this is like Tenet's the movie he wanted to make. You could absolutely dislike Tenet because it has very little in the way of character background or internal conflict for the main character. I mean, absolutely. I will say Oppenheimer is like, he heard all that and he's like, you idiots. All right, I'm going to do a deep dive character study that focuses on a really complex person and all the nuances that come with having convictions and questioning them and being moral in some areas and sliding in others and what it means to be a good person. And I'm just going to do a 3-hour movie about that.
Yeah.
And that's what Oppenheimer is.
That's interesting. I obviously I haven't seen it yet. I wonder how much of that is, hey, I'm going to prove you wrong, and how much of it is Tenet just like is the absolute apex of that previous style. And he's like, okay, I did it. I'm done. It's time to try something new. And, I absolutely believe he does character well. Memento, which was his first big, I don't know if it was his first movie, but it's the one that introduced people to him.
It's like his first studio movie, I think, or something.
That one has phenomenal character work in it.
Boy, I just repeated exactly what you said. Watch it and see. It still may not be your cup of tea, which is, again, totally fine. I think I'm going to be hard-pressed to find a better movie in the next decade than this one.
Holy cow.
You know how much I like Lincoln. This is the same type of film, but made by Christopher Nolan, so it uses interesting narrative tricks of the style that I really enjoy. And all of that sort of stuff. So, I doubt there's going to be a better movie that I will see for the next. Maybe I hope there's plenty. But like I said, Lincoln's probably the best movie I saw of that decade. And this is.
I'm trying to think if I have a top movie of the decade.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough call because I really do like Infinity War. I think it's a really cool film, made really well.
I love those moments though where you're like, it is going to be a long time before I see something this good. For me, that was both Arrival and Your Name, which I saw on the same flight. And even on the little like tiny back of the seat screen, those two blew my mind right out of my head. I may have still not seen a science fiction movie that good since
Arrival.
Since Arrival and Your Name.
Do you like them better than Dune? Dune 1?
I really love Dune 1. But the problem Dune has in this very specific competition is that I know the book backwards and forwards. I've read it like 10 times. And so while visually and in terms of representing those ideas on screen and adapting them, it was wonderful. It was magnificent. It didn't wow me.
It can't
with
surprise
its
you
ideas
because you have read Dune so many times. Whereas Arrival, if you
Arrival, I had never read Ted Chiang's story. I did not know what to expect from it, and it showed me things I've never seen before or imagined.
Right. I would say Your Name was like that for me. I had read Ted Chiang's story, but Arrival's brilliant in that even if you read the story, it does the same emotion backwards that the story does, which is just pure genius. But regardless, we're talking which 10 out of 10 is best, like when we tried to pick the best fantasy authors. But anyway, this is a 10 out of 10.
Cool.
I will look forward to talking about it. So those who haven't seen it, know that we are going to eventually discuss it.
Eventually,
it may
going
not
to
be
talk about it
for everyone.
Yeah.
But it did win all the awards, and it deserves them. So we are not talking about.
No, that's not actually our
topic
for the day.
We sometimes, maybe we should admit at some point that occasionally we go on tangents.
I do think that it is very big of us to admit that.
Yeah.
After so long. Here, I always feel bad that I'm like shilling for Coke. I'm going to turn it so you can only see the nutritional information on the camera. Assuming it even does it even show up on the camera, or is it below the shot?
You see it occasionally dependent upon where the coaster is.
Well, here, we'll put it over here. The thing is, I've said this before, we'll say it again. There's a giant light right here, right in my face. And if I don't drink caffeine, I will have a very bad headache by the end of recording. So this is my medicinal Coke.
With Nick Fury on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of.
Nick Fury with his eye patch, showing me what I should have done to avoid the headache light. No, what we're actually going to talk about is video games.
Yeah. Specifically the transition between arcades and home consoles, which we lived through, and a lot of our listeners didn't.
Yeah, this was suggested by Donald, who keeps coming up with clever ideas for us.
Yes. Should we be suspicious of how many of these relate to how old we are?
This, as much as I wish to take credit for that, this is actually far more biased in that I grew up on the console generation, and I love arcades, but I never touched that true arcade generation. So for me, it was mainly, I'm curious what your two's experience actually was.
The games were awful, but they're all that we had. There's your summary.
But did you think they were awful at the time? There's certainly some that I thought were awful.
There are ones that I love, but I kind of... So this is the economic theory of it. Now, I loved all of these. Dad would hand us, my brother and I, a 20. And Jordo and I would go into the arcade. We'd usually go watch a movie, buy dinner, and then spend the rest of the arcade. And that we could do that for a 20 each back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so we would then spend an hour after the movie and after eating just playing arcade games,
feeding quarters into the machine.
I played everything. If it was a game from that era, I have experience with it. And they had an incentive, which is a bad incentive, which is they want you, it's like modern mobile gaming. They want you attached enough to keep wanting to play, but they don't want you to actually win or make progress without paying tons of money. Because of that balance, even when it was perfect, was bad, right? The incentive was wrong.
Yeah.
Even when you had something that, I would say things like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, the incentive, didn't ruin the experience because you were usually playing against other people and things like that. But that's still a quarter every time. That's a quarter for a minute, 2 minutes of entertainment.
Yeah.
And games that were actually good, and you could have some fun on long term, they had to put a mechanic on it to time you out. Did you ever play, what's it called? Kadesh or Kadesh?
I will look it up.
I don't remember that name.
So this was an epic RPG where you picked a character class and you were going to go and go on a quest. And so you put your quarter in, you started, and a little timer started at the corner. And you had a minute and 30 seconds.
Oh, yes. I do remember this. Joust was similar. And this was the one where there were 4 character options, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like Wizard or whatever. And they did something similar with Gauntlet, which I loved. My brother and I loved Gauntlet.
Gauntlet was so great.
But they had to make your life count down. Because otherwise you would have too much fun playing the game too long.
You would get too good at it.
Yep. And so they just had to put in a mechanic where you start at 1,000 health and then it just starts ticking down, which not only causes you to just die after a certain amount of time, it causes you to play frantically and poorly because you are watching the doom clock count down on your life. And I think this was bad for video games. Even when they made the jump to consoles, they put timers on a lot of levels because they were used to this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly it's like, does it really matter if you have a timer to complete a Mario level? No. The timer does almost nothing. You can, as a good game designer, can add some mechanics in to make it worth something. And usually, Miyamoto did. And so, but at the same time, it was an artificial limit on, finishing.
An artificial limit designed to require quarters.
Yes. Having a timer count up so that you then can time how long it takes you to defeat the level is just better in every way.
Mm-hmm. And these, I do remember this one had, like, as you went through the dungeon, you could find little hearts or whatever it was that would refill some of that life timer.
Yes.
So it's not purely just you're paying for 2 minutes and then you're dead. If you were really good, you could play for longer than that. But like you said, it encouraged you to play frantically and to run screaming madly through the dungeon. And so you never got very far.
Was it Kadash or Kadash?
Swords of Kadash is what
Swords of Kadash.
Swords of Kadash.
Yeah.
This is what you're describing is something that I bet a lot of modern listeners may have only seen in Stranger Things. Stranger Things season 3 has all the mall stuff in it. And we don't really have malls the same way. I mean, a lot of communities just straight up don't have malls anymore at all. It was such a brief period of time when that's, they had all the restaurants, they had the movie theaters, they had the arcades. And you would just go and you would hang out there, and that's where all the other kids were, and that's how you'd spend your time.
And though we didn't know it at the time, consoles were inevitable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we had the technology for these games, but it was prohibitively expensive to buy for the home, to use in the home. So they built the arcade cabinets to play these games and then run off the quarters. But it was inevitable this was going to die. This was only a stopgap because nobody wanted to be doing that. We liked the culture. We enjoyed the 80s and 90s neon, those carpets with triangles that would glow in the black light. We enjoyed the experience of, my brother and our friends would get around a Street Fighter cabinet and then, we would see how far we could get, and then we would fight each other and things like that. It was a fun time, but it was also really expensive.
It was, especially in the 80s. When, one play of Mortal Kombat was 50 cents because they charged 2 quarters. And I could get a hamburger for the same price. It became this very clear opportunity cost of, is it actually worth trying to do this, or should I just eat?
I remember, though, getting Pac-Man at home for the first time. And it was probably the 2600. You can look it up a little, Donald. Probably the 2600 by then, but the Atari. And the Pac-Man port was so bad. Pac-Man flickered. The ghost flickered. It was monochrome. And I remember being so supremely disappointed by how bad the home experience was and thinking, I'll never be able to really enjoy Pac-Man because it's either too expensive or it's too bad.
Or it's crappy. It's what a lot of people don't realize or remember is that the really good home Pac-Man was actually Mrs. Pac-Man. That's when they retooled it and they added all the colors. And that's what most of us played, was Mrs. Pac-Man. Because, the original Pac-Man was bad.
You were correct. It is the Atari
Yeah,
2600.
yeah, 2600. I remember when we got our 2600 because we had an original Atari, but I was a little too young for it. The original Atari had
The little joystick
the
thing.
joystick controller and things like that. And I did play that. Like I remember playing Tron on that. On the original. That's the original Atari, right?
That's
the
from what I'm
Tron
saying, yeah.
game.
There was
I remember.
a racing game.
Rally
Yep.
X.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's the 2600 when I was kind of old enough to really start getting good at games, and we bought one on a trip. My dad bought it for us because we were going to go stay in a hotel, and it had what did it have? Spy Hunter? Was that Atari or was that Nintendo?
I don't know.
trying to
I
remember.
played the shiz out of Spy Hunter in arcades, but I don't
Yeah.
remember it ever being on a console.
I got it on the console. And it was actually kind of okay. But whatever we got, I was like 9,
Yeah.
and
Hey,
just-
so here's a
Yeah.
question. When you you say all your friends would cluster around the cabinet for
Yeah.
whatever arcade game you were all playing, did you do the thing where you lined up quarters on it?
yeah, on the top. So the top where you would see like
Where the name would
where
be?
the name would be, we always lined up. There's a little slot where you could put the quarter, not intentionally,
Yeah.
but between the name and the frame of the thing, you'd line up your quarters up there.
Did you do anything to make it clear whose quarters were whose?
We didn't, because usually there was only one quarter, one or two.
The highest I think we ever got to was 4 or 5, and at that point, it was like, okay, mine is heads, this is tails, this is heads upside down, to just kind of differentiate them.
Yeah.
So when they got to your quarter, you could say, "Oh, that's the upside down head. That one's mine," and then it was your turn to play.
I remember being on Mortal Kombat and annoyed when it wasn't one of our friends, because the friends we would usually let us play, like, see how far you can get in campaign. And then once you died, we play a few rounds of versus, and then someone else got to try the campaign. And some kid would always walk up in the middle of your campaign and challenge you and then kill you, and that ends your campaign.
Yeah.
Super annoying.
I remember when Mortal Kombat debuted. So many of the arcade games I just remember existing. And, you know, when you're a kid, you assume that if it exists now, it's always been there.
Yeah.
But when Mortal Kombat came out, you know, they added the thing to the movie theater by my house, and then there was all the controversy around it because it was so bloody, and it cost 2 quarters instead of 1. And it was a big deal that there was a new arcade game.
We were seeing new arcade games all the time, but I was going to the arcade every week. But Mortal Kombat was a big deal. I don't want to downplay. Were your parents were they worried about the violence and stuff?
No, they didn't care. If it was my money, they didn't care what I spent it on. The rules, though, were usually where I was allowed to go.
That's smart.
Because there was a kind of, you know, Salt Lake City's a grid, and so I had certain streets that were the boundaries, and I couldn't cross them. But the grocery store that had Mario and Spy Hunter and one other, probably 1942, that was across 21st South, and I was not allowed to cross 21st South by myself. And so every time I had some money and wanted to go play Mario,
So
I
you're
had to
talking
break
about
the rules.
Mario, not Super Mario Brothers.
No, this was Super Mario Brothers.
Oh.
Yeah.
In a cabinet?
Yeah. Did you never play Super Mario Brothers in a cabinet?
No, I bought a Nintendo. I played Mario Brothers before Nintendo existed.
Yeah, there was a comic store, which was not across 21st, so I could go there. They had ice blockers or whatever that was called, and they had Donkey Kong, and then they eventually upgraded Donkey Kong to Mario Brothers, which was not Super Mario Brothers, and those we could go. That was Comics Utah back in the day.
Yeah, but you weren't at arcades for most of this.
It's because I couldn't reach an arcade within that boundary of where I could go on my own.
Right.
The arcade, let's see, they had mall arcades, and we had 49th Street Galleria, which no longer exists. It's like a college or something. and like a little community college. So yeah, we would go to the arcades relatively rarely. It was more often just that 2 or 3 cabinet culture.
You waiting to tell us something? Did you?
Oh, no.
Uh-huh.
You're totally good. I'm actually impressed to see that there's so much history in the gaming cabinets.
Oh yeah, tons of history. So when I was pretty little, so it was probably 7 or 8. There was a place in Nebraska that was awesome in that it was a precursor to like a Chuck E. Cheese or something like this. We didn't have one of those then. I don't know when Showbiz. We were Showbiz rather than Chuck E. Cheese.
Most places were.
Yeah. But before that, even there was a place that my dad would take me, and it was a restaurant and ice cream shop. And if you bought dinner, you got a armband and a certain amount of time in the arcade, and a person walked around with tokens. And any game you wanted to play, just put a token in for you, and you could play for like a half hour.
Oh, that's cool.
On their arcade machines that they owned. And that was awesome. That's where I played original Mario Brothers. Played a lot of that. I played whatever that game is that has the ball that's rolling through a 3D landscape that you play with the...
the Marble one?
Yeah, Marble Madness. It was a precursor, I think, to Marble Madness, or it was Marble Madness, where you had to roll...
The little trackball.
Except
it was a huge trackball.
Yeah, the huge trackball. I played all the old school ones. You know, Donkey Kong was there, but by then Donkey Kong and Pac-Man were a little old.
Yeah.
By that point, like they were the first generation-ish of these things. Marble Madness. Is that what it's called? I think it might have been a weird name that's a precursor to Marble Madness, and Marble Madness was like a later generation thing, but I could be wrong.
The later upgrade.
That's what I'm seeing from Atari, at least. So
it wasn't on Atari. This is a cabinet game. The Marble Madness is the Atari game that was a clone of this, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm trying to remember, but I can't.
Yeah. So, what are some favorites of yours that we have?
Favorites? Yeah. Puzzle Bobble.
Puzzle Bobble.
Arguably my favorite arcade cabinet game ever was Puzzle Bobble because I was good at it.
Okay.
I wasn't super good at the more twitchy ones. Let's see. I did enjoy Icebreakers a lot. And then, of course, Spy Hunter.
Okay, yeah. Spy Hunter is great.
Spy Hunter was great.
The generation right after these is where all of my favorites come from. Those are all just a little, like, once they started getting a little more sophisticated. So Golden Axe, Heavy
Golden
Weapon.
Axe was cool. Altered Beast was
Altered
cool.
Beast, good old Altered Beast. I played a ton of Altered Beast. The Ghostbusters video game was legit awesome. Arcade cabinet.
I don't think I played that one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Later on, once I was in like junior high and high school, so I was busing across the city and then would walk through the malls.
What's it called?
Marble Madness? I was gonna say, I think it is Marble Madness.
Maybe
the
it's
only
Marble
one I've seen is Marble Man.
It wasn't called. It had like the one I'm thinking of has a weird name that like starts with a P. It does not, or maybe it doesn't start with a P. But it's like it's a word that doesn't mean anything, and so you won't be able to find it easily, right? It's just like a name. It's like a weird word that it's not Polybus, right? Because that's the fake video game. But that's the word that keeps popping into my head is something like that. But maybe I'm remembering a different game and conflating them.
This might be comments if you can find it.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
So let's see. Once I was older and I had more access because I was able to bus around. Castlevania.
Okay.
Did you not ever play Castlevania?
Yeah, on my Nintendo.
Well, yeah, I didn't have one until much later than everybody else did. And then when I had one, all I played on it was Tetris and Ice Hockey and Final Fantasy VI.
Okay.
Which was called 3 at the time. And Ninja Turtles.
Okay, the Ninja Turtles. Oh, that was the last generation of great arcade cabinets.
The really wonderful, it had the 4 heroes. There was an X-Men one that was the same thing, this kind of 4 characters, and there were 4 joysticks around.
And they do the giant screen. That was good.
So 4 people could play, and you just kind of walk down the street beating up ninjas, and eventually a boss fight would happen.
But see, there's something interesting here for those who aren't old enough that might not know. Those both happened when the consoles had begun and had taken over. By the time Ninja Turtles were out, Super Nintendo not just regular Super Nintendo was out because I remember playing that like when I was a junior and senior. And so we're right before the CD age. We're like right before N64 and then PlayStation. And what was happening was the arcade makers were in an arms race where they could make a single cabinet that was expensive enough with enough, power and chips that it could play better than any console game. But the console games were close and you could play any number of them.
Yeah.
And so suddenly it's like they saw their impending death and they're like, we just have to stay one step ahead. But the laws of diminishing returns, I mean, I'm sure people have noticed this with recent console generations. Every leap forward is a huge amount of more processing power for a very small amount of improved user experience.
Yeah.
And so the leap between regular Atari and 2600 was mind-boggling. And then the leap to regular Nintendo, just like life-changing. Super Nintendo, thumbs up. And Super Nintendo games are like the earliest games that I can give to my kids and they'll play and be like, oh, this is fun. This is a real game, right?
Yeah. This is the period of arcades that produced things like Moonwalker.
Yeah.
Where they were like, what can the consoles not do? Bad 3D effects. And so they would build these like Pepper's Ghost kind of things around the cabinet so that it looked like you were looking at a hologram instead of a TV. And the gameplay was terrible, but it was something you couldn't get at home.
Well, that's the transition they made. But there were a couple of really great games where they realized maybe we can hook them with gameplay and you stop dying so much, right? Like you could play for a little while on these better games and get good at them and enjoy them kind of like a home console game. They were charging you 50 cents, but they were keeping you there. And then the tipping point hit where anything they did, the consoles could do unless it had apparatus. And that's when DDR and the, Dance Dance Revolution and the, shooter games with the guns, like the actual hooked up gun, or the rhythm games that require like all of these things that have peripherals, they took over the arcades.
Or the racing games where you sat on a motorcycle or whatever.
And the arcades then just stopped being what they had been. Because you can only have so many of those. And I think most of the arcades closed, and then you had a few cabinets sometimes still in a mall. But they would always have like the game slot machine type things that aren't gambling, except it's a claw machine and it's gambling, and the tickets and all of that stuff. And it's a different vibe entirely.
Yeah, the only place to really find this anymore is in pizza party kind of place.
Yeah.
Or
Nickelcades.
Nickelcades have them. Nickelcades are great. The Nickelcade here used to still have the Ninja Turtle one.
Yep.
And I remember going to one of Jordo's birthday parties in a Nickelcade, when we were all in our 20s, and we're like, okay, we're going to drop $5 playing Ninja Turtles with 4 of us. I think that for me, that Ninja Turtles might be the absolute pinnacle of arcade.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
That and the X-Men game, whichever one of those is like...
The X-Men one was so good.
Yeah.
Because, like, even with the Ninja Turtles, they all kind of played the same. Whereas the X-Men, Colossus was pure range, and Nightcrawler could jump around and do stuff. They played very asymmetrically, and that was a really good one, too.
We bought that one on our PlayStation, and my boys actually enjoyed it.
Oh,
if
good.
my boys can enjoy a game from this era, it was a good game, because a lot of the games from this era don't hold up. So
yeah, there was one other thing that I was gonna say, and now it's gone from my brain. I know we've talked before about the history of, buying home consoles.
Yeah.
First console I got was just a regular Nintendo, and it was pretty late in the game. We're talking almost 90s.
Okay. It was 87 for the Nintendo in the US.
Yeah, I think I got it. I think I got mine in 89.
Okay.
I want to say.
So so my family was unsurprisingly, like the way that I talk and things, we were upper middle class, right? Which meant that I just what's
83.
that? 83 for the original Nintendo. So
Yep.
I'm even that makes sense. Yeah, because
That makes
I
a lot more
was
sense.
because I would have been 8 or 9.
Yep.
Yeah. Not 11 or 12. Yeah. And so I had each console as they came out. By the time it was, I've told this story before. When it was regular Nintendo, I went to visit my uncle. So I guess I didn't get a Nintendo right immediately because I did get a Nintendo when I was 11.
Gotcha.
So I got mine in 86.
That's not bad.
86.
Yeah, because I had a 2600 up till then. But I remember buying it with the money my dad gave me for food, right? I've told that story.
Yeah.
And then we actually sold the Nintendo to buy a Super Nintendo. I saved up and then sold the Nintendo to buy the Super Nintendo, like right when a Super Nintendo came out. And then when I was in Korea on a mission, Jordo sold the new Super Nintendo to buy a PlayStation. So when I got back, he left to go to Japan, and I had a PlayStation.
And you had a PlayStation.
And we sold the PlayStation and traded it back and forth to get a PS2. So like that PS2, which I still have somewhere, has the DNA of my original Nintendo somehow in it. And so that was fun.
The legacy continues. That's awesome. Yeah, that original Nintendo, like I said, all I ever really played on it was Tetris and Ice Hockey and Final Fantasy 3. I did play 2 on it as well, but if you've played Final Fantasy 2, it doesn't hold a candle to 3.
We may need to talk some more about this. We may need to go into a second episode because I want to talk Game Boy. I want to talk console wars.
Okay.
And your experience of those.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Talk Dreamcast.
Dreamcast.
Okay, so next week we will return and we will talk more about consoles.
Yep. How's that been?